Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 443. This program is a merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana and Miriam bas Chayesar Altois, Yekusil ben Leah Rochel and Rochel bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Toders by Miriam and Sarah bas Rochel Altois. We've entered into the month of Nissan, considered to be the first of the months of the lunar calendar, the new year of the lunar cycle. This month, the Jewish people, 3,335 years ago, left Mitzrayim, the famous exodus from Egypt, Geulas Mitzrayim, Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that was told to Moshe Rabbeinu on Rosh Chodesh when Hashem was showing Moshe, HaChedesh Hazeh, this is the month that will be the month of renewal, the redemption, experiencing renewal. And not just then, but in all generations to come. And of course, this leads 2 weeks later from Rosh Chodesh Nissan to the 15th of Nissan, this very day, the Jewish people left Egypt, the Mitzrayim. So, to ask the question, what unique energy radiates during this time? It's the power of Nissan itself. Nissan, first, as I just said, it's HaChedesh Hazeh Lachem, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. And Chedesh comes from the word month, but it means from the word renewal. So the energy of renewal, of experiencing something that is new in your life. We all know one of the great challenges of life is getting into routines, into a rut. Even if it's not a negative one, but boredom, monotony is not healthy for the human being. Especially when you're dealing with something that's also negative, bad habits, bad routines, a bad regimen, you get stuck. So the very idea that here comes a month, the very month itself radiates with a power of renewal. And especially when you understand it in the context of Mitzrayim, from the word Mitzorim v'Gvulim. Mitzrayim comes from the word boundaries, limits, constraints, which is exactly what creates that rut, which creates that stuck situation. So Chedesh, HaChedesh Hazeh Nissan, gives us the power of some new energy, fresh air, to get out of that situation and to get out of any Mitzorim v'Gvulim, any limitations that may trap us. So this is a perfect opportunity. Everybody's always looking when and how can I begin anew, or at least not talk about necessarily cold turkey, but begin a new approach to things, get myself out of something I've been doing for so long, even if it's a positive thing. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya Perek Tezvav, that even if a person studies 100 times in the time of the Talmud, reviews their study 100 times, it was considered lo yavodeh. It wasn't considered serving God. Why? Because it was a routine. That was the habit. That was the custom. That 101 time, going one more over the 100, that breaks the pattern. And that opens up something new and something powerful. So that's even a positive element, especially as I mentioned, when you're dealing with things that also have negative side to it. So that's a general lesson in general, even before we come to Pesach itself, we're already within that energy of Yitzias Mitzrayim, starting from Rosh Chodesh Nissan. In general, 30 days before a holiday, already begins the power of that holiday. Shleishim Yom Kedem Achag. But as here specifically it says that the whole story of the Exodus from Egypt and Parsha begins with HaChedesh Hazeh Lachem. So it's very clear what that teaches us in our own lives. That we are compared to the moon. The moon waxes and wanes, and just as it disappears, it's reborn again. We too can experience rebirth. Now this is true all year round, especially considering what the Alter Rebbe writes in Shari Yechad V'Amunah, that the existence is perpetually created every moment anew. But in that itself, there are levels. It can be renewing that which was there before. Comes Nissan, this Chedesh of Chidush. And then when you add into the equation that it's also Chedesh HaGeula, the Medrash says, B'Nissan Nigel, the Gemara Medrash say, B'Nissan Nigalu, B'Nissan Asidin Le'Goyal. In Nissan they were redeemed, the Jews, and Nissan we will be redeemed. So it has the power of Geula, which is of course the same idea. Where Goyla can be more of a static state, and Geula introduces the Aleph, a Chidush, introduces a new form of energy. as the Medrash says, that when God, Mishabacha, when he created the world, so then he was Keveya, he designated Rosh Hashanah as being Tishrei. That's the birthday of the world. But when he chose his people, Kishabacher, B'Yakov Abonov, then he was Kaveh Lehem Chedesh Shel Geula. He designated for them a month of Geula, which the world is also created by God, obviously. But it's still created within the parameters and structures of existence. In the language of Chassidus, Mamala Kalam. Whereas Nissan adds the element of Chiddush, which also explains the meaning of the month. Nissan says, wherever it says, Nissan, first of all, comes from the word Nes, a miracle. Autumn Nisi, it's like a flag. A Nes, a miracle, means something that lifts you up higher than the regular routine. A natural event, even though every natural event, as the Baal Shem Tov says, and even before the Baal Shem Tov, the Chacham Tzvi and others, that nature itself is just perpetual miracles, happening 1 second after the other. But the Baal Shem Tov explains it that the difference between miracle and nature is only frequency. But yet, when you actually see a suspension of nature or something that is extraordinary, you recognize the extraordinary within the ordinary, even in a deeper way. So Nissan is what's revealed miracles, and that's why it's come from the word Nes. The Gemara says any word that has two nuns, like Chanina, is Nisei Nisim Nasalei, miracles of miracles. So this is the same idea. The Chassidus brings from Akedas Yitzchak, which is a sefer from Yitzchak Aramah, from the Middle Ages, where he writes that there's two ways to know God. One is through nature, the consistency of nature, its perpetuation, and one is through miracles. Miracles show you the regalia of nature as suspension, something that's higher than the order. But the order itself is also a divine force. So Nissan reflects the Hanhoga Nisis, which is a Hanhoga that's L'mayla Mederech HaTeva, higher than natural, which in our Veda means going out of your natural abilities or natural habits, by going a bit beyond. In simple terms, it means this: you want change, create change. Initiate change. You give certain amount of zakah every day or every week. Add a little more. You study Torah, a little more, both in kamus, in quantity and in quality. Tefillah, same thing. A little more in quantity and in quality, in kavanah and intention. Wherever you push something beyond your own natural limits, you in turn will generate also something that's nisi, beyond its natural limits. And that's how it works. It is that way in relationships. You want to intensify something, don't just expect to receive it. Do something that shows that you've expanded your containers, and in turn, the other, your significant other, the other person in the relationship, including God, will reciprocate in kind. So that's a basic lesson of Nissan, Chedesh HaGeula. And especially, as I said, once we move closer to Pesach, every day closer, that only adds and intensifies that energy and that power. And this is the power to be able to go out of Mitzvah and Gvulim. It's a tremendous thing. I mean, sometimes we take it for granted, we hear the words, but personalize it. Apply the idea in Chassidus, and you see it's really what we're all asking for. And this can be a brach in health. This can be in issues in dealing with your family and children. It can be relationships. It can be your own personal struggles, your own personal mitzarim v'gvulim. Fill in the blank. Find something that you want to change, that you feel we want to grow out of, something that's keeping you trapped. And then concentrate and act accordingly, and you'll see what happens. That's why we also say the Nasi every day of Nissan, the beginning of Nissan till Pesach. Nasi comes from the word Hisnasus, to elevate, like a Nes. Not Nes, this Hisnasus is with a sin, but the same idea of elevation, of lifting, of elevating to a higher level. And so the Nasi helps us, the Nasi within each one of us, and the Moshe Rabbeinu within each one of us lifts us up to another state. Which can also explain, let's go over to the parsha. This week is parsha Tzav, which in most years is the parsha that is usually Shabbos HaGadol, the Shabbos before Pesach. So let's talk about Tzav, and then we'll talk about Shabbos HaGadol, all in this same context. What's the connection? The Shalosh says that the parshas are connected to the holidays. He even applies that to Chanukah. Chanukah is a holiday that came later, after Teresh B'Ksav, and still the parshas are connected. You connect Vayeshev, Miketz. So for sure the parsha is connected to the holidays of the Torah itself. So what's the connection with Tzav? This is the mitzvah of Pesach. We learn in Parsha Boy. We learn about it in Parsha Emer, Parsha Re'eh. different places where Pesach is mentioned. But Tzav also has the same concept. And Bahagdim, as we like to say, Chassidus says, it's an introduction. Chassidus brings from the Sefer Yetzirah that the whole existence is built on Eilam Shana Nefesh. That means space, time, and soul, sometimes called space, time, and man. Space is, of course, Malkim, is the place that we occupy. Time is the flow of past, present, and future, and the person that lives within that space and time. Eilam Shana Nefesh, acronym Oshan, which is like the smoke, the cloud that covered Har Sinai, Har Sinai Oshan. Al Ayin Shinun, Eilam Shana Nefesh. And that's why you find find often that the emphasis of something is not just in one of those three, but in all three. For example, when the Kohen Gadol goes in Yom Kippur into the Holy of Holies, the Rebbe emphasizes this a lot. It says you have Eilam Shana Nefesh of the holiest of holy. You have the holiest Kaddish Kadoshim in Mokim, it's the Holy of Holies. You have Kaddish Kadoshim in Zman, in time, the Yom Kippur Achaz B'Shana, the holiest day of the year. And you have the holiest person among in Nefesh, Eilam Shana Nefesh, the Kohen Gadol. So when we talk about a month of Nissan, where you're experiencing renewal and elevation and higher states of being, so how does that apply to a person? Each of us have different parts. We all know that a human being is made up of many parts. We have the mind, we have our heart, we have our legs, different faculties. The same thing is in the spiritual level. Even if you're a Yisrael, meaning you come from the tribes that are not from Shevet Levi, still we have a Levi within each one of us, a Kohen within each one of us. And the Pesach says it explicitly, Va'atam tiyali mamlechas Kohenim v'gei Kaddish, by Mount Sinai. When they came out of Mitzrayim, they stood by Har Sinai. It says, you shall be mamlechas Kohenim, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The Rambam at the end of Hilchos Shmita v'Yevel says, Le Shevet Levi Bilvad, not Shevet Levi alone, but every person literally, who separates himself from total immersion in the material world and sanctifies himself. So we all have that capacity. What's the theme of Parsha Tzav? Parsha Tzav is focused almost entirely, if not entirely, on the Kohanim. Tzav means command. Hashem tells Moshe, here's what you shall tell the Kohanim. After Parsha Vayikra, it talks much about the offerings. It talks now about the Kohanim that served in the temple. They had a specific role. They were chosen for a specific role, to serve as leaders of making the material world into a dwelling place for the divine. It commands exactly what they should be doing. Later in the chapter, he talks about the 7 days of dedication, how they dedicated the temple and how they were trained to the work that they have to do. The ongoing theme is talk about the Mizbeach, how the fire burns all the time. Eish tukadal Mizbeach, the fire is constantly burning. And what is the point of the fire? It's to consume the offerings that are brought, all the different types of offerings. And the Kohanim were the people who facilitated that, both in bringing the offering. Some of the offerings they partook in, that was their reward, so to speak. They ate from it, that which remained. So this is the theme of the chapter. Look, what's the connection? It's very obvious. If this is Zman, in time, this is the month of Nissan and Chiddush, an elevated state, it's also the time to reveal the Kohen within each one of us. Which also explains the relevance of this parsha to all of us. Obviously, it relates to the actual Kohanim, and especially when there's a Beis HaMikdash, or when Mashiach comes in the third temple. But it also relates to all of us, that we all have to have that element of feeling a state that we are servants. Lakanuk, from the word servant, we serve God. And serve what? By taking all our being and our animal soul, which is bringing a korban, Adam ki yakir mekem korban LaHashem, like he said. And the Kohen within us, that sacred entity within each one of us, helps bring that offering on the Mizbeach. And the fire is always burning. What's the fire? It means the pilot flame. There's always a fire, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, burning within your altar, within you. And the point of the fire is not just to be a fire. It could be a fire, God forbid, ashtuz de l'umazeh, a fire that is passionate about material things and about selfish things, but it could also be a fire that's directed toward consuming the material and harnessing it. That's why part of the korban, in some cases, is actually eaten. It's to harness it, toward divine ends. Toward what? Being a korban from the word kiruv. Korban comes from the word close. Sacrifice is not necessarily the best translation. Offering yourself, taking the material world. And that's exactly the theme of Nissan. Even though this is a theme all year round, and this is the Aveda, the service we're supposed to do all the time, but especially in this month, it stands in a higher state, because that's why that's why they left Mitzrayim, but to serve at this mountain, and be mamlechas kainim, to serve as being a kain, a great Kaddish, to be unique, stand out. Not mundane, not the regular routine, but you are a nation of Nisim, an elevated state, Kedusha, elevated, sanctified. So parsha is telling us how you do that in the person. So we have both in time and the person. And space, of course, is wherever you are. Today, in each one of us, turn it into a sanctuary, our homes, our environments, and of course our Bati Knesses and Bati Midrashes, our synagogues and our houses of worship and houses of study, which are Migdash Ma'at, a mini sanctuary. This applies to all people, including children. So the parsha has direct relevance to all of us, and we need to be trained in this until becomes part of our routine. Our routine should be beyond routine, essentially. And let's now go over to Shabbos HaGadol. The Shabbos also Shabbos HaGadol. There are many different reasons why it's called Shabbos HaGadol. We'll quote the Alter Rebbe's reason in Shulchan Aruch, where he brings it, because Nes Gadol, a great miracle happened. That's why it's called Gadol. It happened on the 10th of Nissan, that 4 days before Pesach, they were told to take the lambs and tie them to the beds in order to prepare for the Paschal lamb. The lamb was the deity of the Egyptians. So this rattled the firstborn, because it was happening right before the plague of the firstborn, and they came and they led a civil war against the Egyptians. That the Egyptians themselves were faced challenged by the leaders of those Egyptians, because the B'cherim, B'char, is a more powerful person. B'char sometimes means from great extra strength, and that's the ultimate victory, that you don't have to fight the war. The enemy itself turns on itself. And that's the Nes Gadol that happened. But because Yud Nisan is also the passing of Miriam, so therefore it was designated for the Shabbos before Pesach. There are other reasons given, many of them connected actually to the same idea, because the lamb represented the deity of the Egyptians, and it was a real slap in the face to bring that as an offering. It's basically offering their Avodah Zarah to God, which was what they ignored and denied. But the Alter Rebbe's emphasis is not just on the fact that the Egyptians couldn't do anything about it, and it was the transformation, but it was also the fact that the enemy itself, the Mitzrayim, after all these years, were turned on by the B'cheir. So the lessons of that, in talking about going back to the themes we're discussing here, Mitzarim v'Gvulim, Mitzrayim is limitations, constraints, inhibitions, fears, insecurities, everything that represents those things that impede us from moving forward. And if you focus on something of that in your life, this is the month to deal with it, especially as we come closer to the Seder. And then, of course, the Pesach night, then you can do it in full glory. So the preparation to the Yetzias Mitzrayim was bringing the lamb, but the preparation was also that you're actually attacking the very core of the enemy. Just like the first Makkah, the first plague was what? Was Makkah's Stam. As Rashi explains, the Medrash explains, why was that the first? Because that was their god. They worshipped the river Nile, because that's where their irrigation came from. There are no rains in Egypt, so it came from the Nile. So the Nile was their Liya'eri v'ani asesini, as Pare said. Liya'eri, I have this Ya'eri, I have the Nile, the river. So the river was struck. First you struck their god, then you strike them, turning the water into blood. So the same idea is that you attack. The Gemara says, and Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, that to cut down the tree, you need the wood of the tree, which is the handle of the axe. That is the ultimate transformation. So it's not just that we will overcome the impediments, the mitzarim v'gvulim, the limits in our lives, but we actually can use them as being a springboard that they will turn against themselves and give us the victory we need, which is the ultimate goal. That means in our personal lives, when there's a setback or there's some mitzarim v'gvulim, yes, one thing you want to leave that place, but you also want the Mitzrayim itself should mamakim Mitzrayim b'bcherem, that the Mitzrayim itself should lead you. The things you've learned from that narrow place, from that constrained place, can teach you things. In addition to the passion that it teaches you to get out of a place like that, like the Alter Rebbe says, chapter 7 in Tanya, why that the Bali Tshuva are greater than tzaddikim, is because they're through their tshuva ma'ava. The thirst, the great thirst they had was the thirst that came from distance and from the divine being concealed. That itself created this tremendous passion, this tremendous fiery passion that allows them to do the tshuva. So what happens is that the negative has become a catalyst, has become the force that actually allows and generates a tremendous power toward the good. The idea of Ishapcha. So that's now Shabbos HaGadol. So we have now not just a Nes, we have Nes Gadol. And all this comes together in a synergetic way that leads us in these days into, ultimately, in close to 2 weeks from now, to Pesach itself. And we'll be talking about that in the next program, a special Pesach program next week, which is also Yud Aleph Nissan. Okay. So with that, we have a bunch of different questions. I hope I can cover as many as I can. Let me begin with some timely issues, meaning things that are happening, current events, let's call it that. So someone writes a question like this. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I admit I have not been keeping up with your broadcast lately, but in searching I have not found an episode discussing this issue, which I would like to see discussed. What insight can you give into the recent upheavals in Israel, with the right-dominated government creating reforms and having thousands of people protesting them? Meaning specifically in how the judiciary system is working there. Of course, it is positive to have a more religiously leaning government, but on the other hand, it seems to be causing greater division within the nation. How heavy-handed should the government be about reinforcing Torah values, and how much should they take the non-from population sensitivities into consideration? It feels like making unilateral decisions will just make the antis more anti. Yet can a religious government compromise on issues like Shabbos and kosher, marriages and gittin, divorce, not to mention gender issues? I find my thoughts going in circles on this issue and would love to hear your insights. Okay. Well, there's one issue, yes, the more right-wing government, and there's, of course, in Israel, as it is among the Jewish people, diverse opinions from one extreme to the next. And then there's the issue with the judiciary that I mentioned. But let's talk about the bigger picture here. Though we don't like to see argument, and we don't like to see discord in general, especially among our own people, but actually this is an unbelievable historic opportunity. And if you ever needed the direction of Chassidus and the direction of the Rebbe in addressing issues like this is the time. This is what we were trained for. We live, unfortunately, in a world where assimilation has ravaged the Jewish people, and most Jews are not familiar. They're Tanekah Shenishbu. They're not aware of what Yiddishkeit is. So whether they're opposed to it, or they're neutral, or they're apathetic, that's all based on something that is not really their fault. So the same question can be asked: how do you deal with Jews like that? And the truth is with all people. So you can go to war and say, this is our position, now I'm a majority, I will impose it upon you. But that's not what we were taught. I'll get to the government in a minute. Let's just talk about the general attitude. We were taught that we have to do everything with inspiration and with love. So whole Pedic Lamed Beis and Tanya. Even with someone that may be doing something wrong, and even if they're doing something wrong and they know better. I remember hearing a story once. It's a very good story I heard that's very, very relevant here. Rabbi Leibel Groner was the secretary of the Rebbe for many years. He had an older brother, his oldest brother. He was a Yerushalmi Jew, not a Chabadnik necessarily, or whatever you call Chabadnik. He was by the Rebbe in the Yuds in the 50s, And he asked the Rebbe a question. The question was, he says in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKadosh, the holy city, you see Jews, unfortunately, that are not keeping Shabbos, at least the revealed way. What should be our attitude to them? You know, there are those that threw stones at cars that are driving. Later I found out, I thought they're throwing stones because they want them to stop driving. No, they want them to stop driving in my neighborhood. I don't care if you drive. Which to me was really selfish. It's one thing, it's a wrong approach how to get someone inspired to keep Shabbos. I'll get back to the story in a minute. But it was not about that. It was like, why are you coming on my turf on Shabbos? Okay, so what should you do? What should be the attitude, he asked? And the Rebbe said to him, it's the way I heard the story, that he once had a similar question when they were living in Leningrad. So we know the Frierdiker Rebbe moved from Rostov, he moved to Leningrad. Today it's called Petersburg. Leningrad was a big city, a very big city. And the Rebbe said to him that the times when we would go to the Farbrengen of my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, so then we'd walk back home, you'd meet Jews, and some Jews were not openly keeping Shabbos. So I asked my father-in-law, the Rebbe said, what should be the approach if you meet a Jew that's smoking on Shabbos or doing something else that you're not supposed to do? Now you could take the approach, you ignore him. You could take the approach, you yell at him. You could take the approach, you try to change him. What should be the approach? And my father-in-law told me, you go over to the Jew and smile to him. In a broad way, you say to him, a guten Shabbos, a good Shabbos. That's what you do. In other words, we understand that a Jew, neshama is always connected. The Rambam says clearly in Hilchos Gerushin, and this is not Chassidus, this is the Rambam, that every Jew always wants to do Torah mitzvahs and not do anything that's opposite of God's will. That's why we call Yitzrei Husha Anseis. Yetzer Hara is the one that forces him to do otherwise. Especially when you're talking about a Tinnik Shenishba, a person who doesn't know better. So what he's trying to do is awaken that neshama in him. And that's the approach. It's not just a matter we like to be more loving and we're more open-minded. No, that's the approach to actually awaken a person. In addition to the simple psychological fact that you start yelling at someone or you start arguing with them, who are you to tell me what to do? It's not usually going to necessarily elicit the results you want. I remember once at a Farbrengen, the Rebbe saying, imagine you go over to somebody and you tell them that because you don't do certain mitzvahs or you're doing certain sins, you'll burn in Gehenna. This punishment, you'll be punished with this punishment, that punishment. Imagine the reaction of the person. Or if you tell them, you have such a beautiful soul, such an opportunity for you to bring that soul alive through a mitzvah. The Rebbe said, imagine yourself, which one is going to have more impact? So this attitude is not just a correct attitude, as I said, a more mental attitude. It's pushed a Torah-dik attitude. What does the Mishnah say? Havim mitalmidiv shel Aaron, Hillel says, Oyev Sholom v'reidiv Sholom, Oyev abriyas u'mekarven l'teira. Love abriyas, even if they're just bri, even if you don't see any other quality. Just the mere fact they were created by God, there's enough reason to love them, as the Alter Rebbe emphasizes in chapter 32 in Tanya. Chapter 11, love. And mekarven l'teira. Don't bring the Teira to him, elevate him to Teira. But Oyev abriyas. Through Oyev Abriyas. So the same should apply with Eretz Yisrael. Every Jew that knows something should be inviting his neighbors to a Shabbos table, show love and kindness, instead of saying, you're not like me, or why are you behaving that way? Or even if you don't say it, but you give that message off. That should be the attitude. Imagine what Eretz Yisrael would look like if every Jew keeps Shabbos would invite his neighbors in that way. Whether they accept or not is another story. But at the end of the day, likelihood, friendly approach has an effect. Find the commonality. And the same thing with the government. Even though there are laws that have to be passed, and you want to protect religious so-called, and we know there are things that, for example, the official bus system doesn't work on Shabbos, and this is before this was even a left-wing government. So that, I'm not getting now into the legalities of things. That you have to do, negotiate in a proper way, and try to implement as much as possible. But the attitude has to be, we're not here to impose, we're here to inspire. We're all part of one nation. No one's telling anyone how to behave. It's not about dictating religion to anyone. It's inspiring and has to be with love. If you do it that way, everything is different. Now, will there be times when the argument, like, in a Knesset argument, should this and this law be enacted where the religious want it and the non-religious don't want it? That's going to have to be debated and see what you could do. But even there, you want to have a little heart and soul. That's what you expect from a Id. That's a Shem and Torah Mitzvahs. Part of Torah Mitzvahs is also Avos Yisrael. It's also being a mensch. It's also making a Kiddush Hashem. If a frum person makes a Chil Hashem in the name of religion, what does that end up causing? It ends up people causing to turn the other way. They have their responsibility, but there's a responsibility when you know more and when you want to elevate everybody. Instead of imposing, everyone should be like me. I'm the right one, you're the wrong one. That shouldn't be the tone. You teach, you educate, you inspire. That has been the approach, and why should that not be able to be applied to Eretz Yisrael today? Will there still be people, and everyone could always blame each other, that just want to fight? There's always going to be elements of that. I'm not denying that. We're not being naive. But you want to isolate that. As much as possible, bring in a tone, a vibe of reconciliation, a vibe of warmth, a vibe of kindness. When I say reconciliation, I'm not talking about compromise. I'm talking about an attitude that allows and embraces people. And yes, there'll be areas that may be a little thornier, so you have to have a few wise people put their heads together and figure out what to do when there's an issue that needs to be addressed in a very direct way. And that's what I have to say on this topic. Talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, when they left Mitzrayim, so all the Yidden that left, so when they came to Matan Torah, it was Vayichan Sham Neged Ahar, Ki Ish Echad B'Lev Echad. Even though before that there were disagreements. So maybe that also can be applied here, that we need to have the Har. We need to connect the bittul that we have to the mountain, to Har Sinai, to God, can help us all rise a bit above our differences and come to a deeper, loving place. And there's no doubt that will create more connection. I'll just conclude with one short story that happened with my father. My father passed away around 18 years ago. After he passed away, I was in Eretz Yisrael with my mother. And my father was a journalist. For many years, he was the Katav, he was the correspondent, the New York correspondent for Yediot Acharonot, which was then the largest daily Israeli newspaper. So my father, when he began, he took over from Elie Wiesel, early 60s. He was at I believe at a press conference in Washington, and there was a woman that began working for Ma'ariv, which was the second largest daily newspaper. And they met. How do we know the story? Because she came to see us, came to see me and my mother. She wanted to just pass on condolences. She knew my father over the years. She was a really older woman, and she said, I'll never forget the first time I met your father, she told me, in Hebrew. I was this young, abrasive Israeli new journalist, and I see a man with a beard and a yarmulke, which was rare to see in the Washington press corps. I went over to him, and we spoke in Hebrew, and I said to him, I see you're new, and I'm sure we're going to meet many times because I work for Ma'ariv, you work for Yediot. But I wanted to know, I hate or I don't like religious Jews. She said, for some reason, I felt the need to tell him that. Your father looked at me without any reaction, any negative reaction, and smiled and said, how do you know I'm religious? Oh, you have a beard, a yarmulke? He said, let me ask you something. You honor your parents? Yes. You visit the sick? Yes. You give charity? Yes. You're more religious than me? And she said, I was so humiliated, so embarrassed, I should say. I felt so embarrassed. I realized, what am I talking about? Exactly. First of all, I don't know what he is. I don't know what. And she said, it changed my whole attitude. What is religion exactly? When you're a mensch and you're a kind person, Rashi says, say Yosher, it's also a mitzvah. Yes, there are other mitzvahs as well. So just an attitude and approach, just one line, how it could change a person's way of thinking. I didn't ask her how it affected her life and whether she's today religious or not, but it was clearly a big impact on her. So it comes down to what you say, not just what you say, but how you say it, and how you can change a person's entire attitude. Again, we're not talking about compromising, we're not talking about soft pedaling, we're not talking about being afraid to tell somebody something. It's all about how is it coming? Is it coming in a condescending, arrogant way? Is it coming in a sensitive, loving way? Okay. So this is a lesson, frankly, not just for this. It's a lesson for many, many issues in life. and everybody can apply that as they see fit. Another timely or another current event that is on people's minds: should we be concerned with the threat of the Soviet Union and other countries using nuclear weapons? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, what should we make of all the escalations in the news today regarding Russia's threats of using nuclear weapons? I should call it Russia, former Soviet Union. And North Korea doing more nuclear tests, and China building up its nuclear arsenal, particularly in missiles that can cross oceans. The U.S. seems to be only escalating with the AUKUS deal and doing military drills with South Korea. It is all very big and scary. These leaders seem to be unstable and making big miscalculations. What would the people of the world have to pay? Why would the people of the world have to pay the price? Someone recently mentioned to me that according to the Zohar, nuclear war is inevitable, Chas v'Sholom, God forbid, and that is part of the process that has to happen before Mashiach comes. This doesn't feel right to me and doesn't seem like something the Rebbe would ever say. Why would it say something like that in the Zohar? Thank you in advance, and thank you for all your programs. They are truly a great help to me, and I'm sure to many others. Well, let's begin with the Zohar. I don't know of such a Zohar, and even if somebody interprets some Zohar, it's just their interpretation. So firstly, get a source. And secondly, absolutely, there are also things in Nach and a Chazal that talk about all kinds of apocalyptic visions of the future. But as the Rebbe said a number of times, we radiates all of this with the world wars and many other of the genocides and all the different bloodshed and wars that we have fought. So that's very clear that no, we do not have to go through anything like that. God forbid, we radiate more than Yetzer for that. That's clear words from the Rebbe and words from other Rabbeim and so on. As far as the escalations, look, the world is not a perfect world. We know that. There's still bloodshed, there's still war, there's still battles, as we see. But our approach has always been, we've been through, and I say we, the Jewish people, coming to Yetzias Mitzrayim, we've been through the worst. 210 years of sustained, not 10 years, not 15 years, like it was under the Nazi regime, as horrible as it was. 210 years of sustained persecution and oppression and genocide and murder and so on. As we were afflicted, we thrived and we flourished. And that has been our story. So obviously, we have to do everything b'derech hateva, naturally, to maintain a peaceful world and to insist on that. And thank God for a country like the United States, in that sense. Not a war-seeking country, not a perfect country, but its fundamentals are there. So we have to pray for that and pray for peace and do whatever we can. But at the same time, to be worried and concerned and anxious, that's not a Torah approach. We have to do our right thing, and Mashiach will come peacefully. The Rebbe said the world is ready. He never said that we need to go through anything even close to this. We just have to open our eyes and do the positive, bring light to the world. That is the approach. And sometimes better not to read all the news, every pinch of every detail, and then you hear this. That alone creates paranoia. And then how people interpret it and commentaries. We don't even know what's real, what's not real. So that may also be a good idea to lower the temperature and lower your exposure to all these doomsday scenarios and so on. But above all is to remember that there's a God in this world, and we are told that we are close to the coming to the threshold of Mashiach and Geula. We're in the month of Geula, and we have to do whatever we can to bring that Geula, and not focus on the negative things. And please God, the Eibishter will help that all these threats will go away. And definitely not even happen, for sure not happen, but even not potentially happen. That's my general response to that. Okay. Trach gut wird sein gut. So let's do another few questions, then we'll do some follow-up. What do I do next after finishing reciting Kaddish for my late mother? So, let's read that. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, this week I will finish, this was a few weeks ago, I believe this question came in. This week I will finish the 11-month cycle of saying Kaddish for my mother. Even though I may not believe in organized prayer or understand the significance of the Kaddish prayer, this person writes, My mother was very religious, and before illness got worse, and while she was still coherent, she asked me and my brothers to say the Kaddish for her. Okay. I got up 6 a.m. every day to make it to a daily minyan, and I'm not an early morning person. I only missed 5 days when I had COVID, and it was not appropriate to attend a public gathering. I did this specifically because it was what my mother believed in and wanted me to do for her. So it was the best way that I could honor and respect my mother. My question is, what comes next? Will there be a sense of closure after I say Kaddish for the last time? What are some other ways I can continue to honor my mother after the Kaddish cycle finishes? So firstly, let me commend you. Well, firstly, let me extend my condolences. That's what we should begin with. Even though it's already some time before, but still, that you should only have simchas and good occasions in your life. But I want to commend you that even if it was not something you would have done on your own perhaps, but maybe it was something you really would have done. I don't want to judge you. God forbid, as I said before, everybody has that fire inside them. And frankly, your mother did you a favor by asking you, but the fact that you complied, what can I say? Unbelievable honor. Saying Kaddish for a parent is considered one of the greatest things you can do. A parent who sacrificed their life long before we even remember it from our youngest of age. And when you say Kaddish, you elevate their soul, you sanctify, you help them in their journey. So to consider that as a tremendous thing that you did, both for you and for your mother. And may that come back to you many times over with many, many blessings. And with that, in that spirit, it continues. Firstly, we say Kaddish every year on the yard site. Not every day, but every year on the yard site. That keeps the cell continuing to elevate. Secondly, Yizkor we say during the different holidays. Yom Kippur, of course, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Some say it quietly on Rosh Hashanah as well. Another way of remembering. And we remember by also giving charity in her honor, with her name. So if you have that capacity, I mean, even on a small level, but especially if you have a larger capacity, maybe build something in her name. Maybe donate something to an organization that you trust or believe in, a cause. Name something for her. Create some eternal memorial, some living memorial on this earth. And in general, living up to her legacy in your own personal life, your family life. I don't know if you have children. I don't know what by extension, what's going on in your life. But anything you do that continues the things that she held precious is the most beautiful way of perpetuating. And remember, it's not just remembering, it's perpetuating. Because her soul lives on through you. Mazare b'chaim, afu b'chaim. As the children are alive, so too is he alive. The parent is alive. So if you began studying some Torah and praying every day and giving tzedakah, all in her honor, a beautiful way of continuing to perpetuate her memory and her legacy. And that should continue to grow until the day comes when we'll be reunited with all our loved ones. Okay. Unrelated, but another question that came in, and I think I should address. So here's the question. How should we deal with our child who wants to marry someone more modern? And to be more specific, dear Rabbi Jacobson, our daughter who is a graduate of Beis Rivka wants to date someone who is not Chabad and is modern Orthodox. All of our other children are strong Chabadniks and married Lubavitchers. This is distressing for us. How should we deal with this? I think our daughter is more modern than we realize. Being that I don't know all the circumstances, and there are many questions I would ask, so let me just put this more in context. If this is the only issue between you and your daughter, meaning you have a great, loving relationship, you trust each other, she speaks to you openly about things, that would be wonderful, and it would be a lot easier to deal with this as well. And I'll get back to that. If, on the other hand, there's other challenges or other tensions, for whatever reason, then maybe the issue is much deeper than just the question of who she wants to marry. Because there's always deeper reasons for things. I would not judge her in any way as a parent, no question about it. You have to be sensitive to her. If anything, it would be good as a parent to know what lies behind this. Why? And not as a challenge. I wouldn't debate. I wouldn't allow her to know about your distress that you use. I think as parents, you have to always unconditionally love your child because every child is different. But it would be good to know. So if you have that open conversation with her, you may discover something. And you may be surprised what you discover. Maybe she had bad experiences with so-called Lubavitchers. And the main thing is that she should marry a person who's a good person, someone who's aligned, obviously, with Torah mitzvahs as much as one can know, and someone who has values in place. Yes, of course, it's more comfortable if we have someone from the same culture, same minhagim, same customs, we call a Lubavitcher. But it's never been a limit. The Rebbe told many people that they should look and they should find a good person. If you have a choice, you can find a person who we call a Lubavitcher, fine. But it shouldn't be a limit. It's not a deal breaker. As far as your own personal distress, that's something you have to work out. Everything has deeper lessons. And I wouldn't look at it as a disappointment or failure. You could ask yourself, maybe there's something that you feel so much you love about Lubavitch. Why didn't she pick that up? Not blaming. It's just an opportunity for introspection. These are some of the parameters or the context I would place in this, addressing something like this. But I would not no way get into any battle over this or any conflict. It should be a loving conversation. It should be one that may be intriguing and trying to learn from each other. And it's interesting how your daughter would respond to all of this. What would her reaction? You want to know what she feels on her own. Like if she knew you were asking this question, what would be her reaction to that? Would she say, my parents are controlling? Would she say, my parents just trying to impose it? That's what I don't like about it so much. They don't let me be me. It'd be interesting what she thinks. And whether she's right or wrong is irrelevant. But that's how she feels, and that's what we need to respect. And I would work around that and based on that. You may also ask some of her siblings who may be close to her. But again, I would do this in a very non-threatening, non-aggressive, very peaceful, very passive, in a very, very kind fashion, kind and pleasant way. And see what you discover. Maybe something you learn from it that you could act on, and maybe not. And if not, you love your daughter like you love all your children, and let's find for her the right person that she feels is fine with her, what she wants, and that she should have a happy life and build a binyan ad with healthy children, Shem Torah and mitzvahs, and hopefully also that are illuminated with Chassidus. There's no question that if your daughter is coming from within, not doing it for you, she's doing it for herself, that's what she'll bring into the home. The inspiration that an akeres habayis, the foundation of a house, is able to accomplish. That's what you want to empower her to do. Okay. Now, there's a few follow-ups that I want to do. See here. Let's begin with a follow-up about the women's so-called, quote, halachik advisors, yoetzes halacha. As I discussed last week, I spoke about it. You can imagine I received many, many responses, most very positive, but there's always some that have issues from one extreme to the next. One is, why weren't you harder on the rabbis that gave out that letter when they write things about women that are very derogatory? The other was the other way around. Why are you getting involved in something? This is rabbinic. The rabbis wrote a letter. Just listen to it. So let me just respond to that in general and then go into some more specifics. I made it very clear, anyone that listens, I was not coming with any agenda. I'm not coming here to undermine rabbis. On the contrary, we must have rabbis, and the rabbis of a community are responsible for their neighborhood and community. At the same time, I think we all can learn to listen to each other. That's what a rabbi is about. That's what a leader is about. A rabbi should not be concerned and be afraid if somebody points out certain things that maybe allows us to understand what is driving this whole movement, so to speak, if it's a movement. And sometimes it can be diffused, as I explained, by just understanding what the root of it is. And sometimes the word, yoetzes halach, is that the right name to give it? And if it was the word mashpia, would that be acceptable? We have a friend, advisor, a consultant. When someone goes to a therapist, is that in any way a threat to the rabbi or a threat to halacha? That's part of halacha. Sometimes you have to go to a therapist. So the same thing is women can be mashpiyas to women in ways that men cannot be. But that's not replacing a rav. It's a very different role. and so on. And that type of conversation is what we need to be having behind the scenes before it proliferates, before it explodes into a public debate, and then you're getting into issues of pride and ego and who's in control and all the sensitivities. As far as those that wrote to me about why not being harder, my job here in Chassidus Applied is not to be harder, not hard. I'm trying to bring light into the picture, clarity, some common sense, based on Torah and Chassidus. A Rav is a Rav, has a role, a responsibility to paskin halachas, address an issue. There are things that Rabbanim perhaps know that there may be a pirza. A pirza means there's some type of breach that you need to address. Where is this concept of yetzes halacha coming from? Is it coming from outside places, and it can ultimately cause problems? At the same time, as I said, you have to be very sensitive to issues that women have, or men for that matter, and make sure it's addressed properly. So we're not denying both sides of it. But this is not about being hard or not being hard. It's about trying to bring clarity into the picture. And when you bring clarity into the picture, you are not here to criticize someone. You want to just, let's address it, the bigger picture here. It's true that today we live in a time, in general, where there's a lot of arguments for feminine rights and women's rights. Is it all legitimate? We know a lot of it is political, and a lot of it is not even positive. There are many women who see that as not necessarily the right way to go. Is it making women more like men, or is it making women more like women? So let's say a drive that women should be rabbis. I think anyone in the world of Allah understands that's not acceptable. That's not just because we are reactionaries and we go back to the past and we never did that. There's a reason the Torah tells us, and the Torah is nitzchis, and there's a logic. On the other hand, that women are leaders in different ways, absolutely. Whether it's shluches, whether it's mashpiyes, whether it's in their home or in their community, they have a very powerful role to play. So someone has to understand all those dynamics. And even when the fact that, for example, you're teaching girls in schools today, that's not because we gave in and compromised. Once Torah people accepted that, whatever the reason is, it becomes part of the Torah approach. No one, even the most extreme, do that. A person individually can do homeschooling for boys and girls if they wish, but I'm talking about the fact that there are schools, even the most Kaddish communities. That doesn't necessarily make it holy. It just means that it's become something that is become standard. And there's a Torah approach to all these type of things. And you have to be so wise to know how to straddle the line, because there are areas that are gray, but you have to make sure sometimes you give into something and it's really coming from a bad place, even though with good intentions, and it could open up a Pandora's box. So everything has to be dealt with case by case in a very discreet way, and definitely before it becomes a machlekes in public, when then creates a situation where people say, you can't trust the rabbis, look at them, look how they speak in such a derogatory way about women. How could I, as a woman, listen to a rabbi like that? There are people who say that. Are they right about it? Even if they're wrong, but that's their attitude. So what do you do if you're a leader? You have to in some way know, not to placate them and not to patronize them, but to find a way to understand what's their issue, what's really bothering them, and address it in a Torah, halacha, and Chassidish way. On the other hand, just to say, just because Rabbi said it, we can't ask a question, there are real struggles, real issues. I can't see a rabbi that would say to a woman who needs, let's say, some feminine emotional support for something, no, you can't go to the woman, you have to come to me, the rabbi, or to a male rabbi. Support, or guidance, or direction. You talk about halacha is halacha, but some people have difficulty. Like, for example, people who struggle with issues of fertility. So yes, there are halachic issues around it, but there are a lot of emotional issues, psychological issues. And you have to find someone you can trust to speak to about it. I don't see any reason why this is a contradiction. And the same thing is in this case. One person wrote a question, which was interesting, a very interesting twist. I'll just sum it up because it's a long one, but briefly, dear Rabbi Jacobson writes about the whole story. And she says the whole idea comes from a foreign place outside of Chabad, from the modern Orthodox world, the whole idea of Yetzes Halacha. And this woman has embraced it. And there are some in Chabad that also so-called supported it. And then the rabbis came out against it. So she writes, I'm a huge feminist. I struggled with a woman's role on the point of walking away from Judaism. I went to secular law school since I could not get smicha. Actually, I could get smicha, but it was at a place that I didn't want to because it would not have been Chabad accepted. Thank God my story is good. I came back and found my answers in Chassidus, and I'm writing about my journey. So, of course, I'm profoundly happy to see this expansion of the woman's role. I truly am. But on the other hand, when something is coming from outside of Chabad system, and rabbis are pointing that out, they seem to have a point. Why should we embrace something that's coming not from within Chabad? I would just add, well, we're talking about halacha here. Within halacha is the question, not just Chabad. It's true Chabad has perhaps certain particular emphasis on different things. And therefore I am confused. Because on one hand, I see some progress here. On the other hand, I see also perhaps foreign forces at work. And we have to respect precedent and we have to respect tradition. And we don't have the right to add anything new. Can you please shed some light and give clarity on this? Thank you very much. So I think what I've said is really addressed this, but I'll just sum it up. There's no question that we have halachas and we're not here to add or subtract from halacha. That's not on the table altogether. On the other hand, we have new circumstances. We have to take the halacha and apply it to these new circumstances. The halacha, second thing is not just halacha, there's the issues like emotional and psychological issues. I didn't look into this thoroughly enough to say, but just for argument, if you didn't use the word ye'etzes halacha, which did come from, let's say, a source outside of what some more frum people would say, some out of their the parameters of their orthodox standards, then why you need to use that name? Why is that name so important? You can use a different name. Because if the name in some way is implying, okay, we can't make you a Rav, so we'll call you instead of a Rav, you're etzes of a Rav. Why go into an area that makes some people uncomfortable? I don't see any reason for that. Why dafka that name? Why not find a name that everybody can accept? That would be the way I would approach something like this. Because I don't think we're talking about the actual role here. Because if it's talking about a woman passing halacha, we know what the laws around that are. Even that has to be expressed in a sensitive way. But we're talking here about advising, counseling, and so on. So that's how you really bridge it, where you don't add anything new, but you also address the new situations. That's, I think, suffices for now, this discussion on this topic. Okay. And then there's, of course, let me say the final word, Shua B'Reiv Yayitz. It's good if we put our heads together. Obviously, an authority is an authority, and they have the right to paskin. But when you're dealing with sensitive matters like this, it's good to be able to hear different positions and come away with what. That's why you have a bezdin, is usually of 3 or more, because you want to hear different opinions and then come to a consensus. So I think that's also very valuable because you really want to hear all the sides of the story. I honestly do not know all the sides. I'm talking about that which I know, based on what I'm saying, what I know, and I'm not giving any final ruling. I'm just suggesting approaches that can do this in a way that can diffuse the issue and one that will be satisfactory and address all the parties and all their concerns. Okay. Another follow-up is, I've been speaking a few weeks ago about Sholom Bayis. So I want to address a few things about that. Right. So, Sholom Bayis. What if my spouse has a personality disorder? In the last episode, you discussed a few weeks ago it should be, you discussed how to resolve differences between spouses. What can I do about my spouse being emotionally unavailable? Sounds like the man is exhausting himself and she isn't receptive. If you can talk to the husband and find out if she, the wife, has personality disorder and send him for help to a good therapist with personality disorders, there is only one side, the side of the one being manipulated, abused, used, and exhausted. Okay, so yes, it's definitely in the list of the usual suspects. I don't know if that's the right word to use here. Is personality disorder, just as there may be other factors involved when you're dealing with a domestic situation of Sholom Bayis. But you have to establish that. For one spouse to just accuse the other they have a personality disorder because they heard it from someone, or it's a good way of them getting off the hook, that's not exactly what we're looking at here. This is a professional discussion. And personality disorders are also shrouded in many enigmas and many complications. Not everybody knows. It's not always easy to diagnose something. But if there is really a problem, and it can be resolved through conversation and through a third party, and so on, then sometimes that's what you have to look at, from both ends, by the way. I never would tell one spouse to go meet a psychiatrist or someone who's a professional, and not the other, because you never know. You never know. If you're already checking and it's also more respectful, they would check that. Now, it could be humiliating for some people. There's a stigma related to it. But if you really want to find emes and peace, you want to know if there is some type of disorder, if there's some type of depression, maybe mild, something that can be somewhat tamed. Because if it's there, you want to address it. You don't want to be dealing with a situation, you keep going around in circles and getting back to square one. So there's no question that has to be addressed. But with a lot of care. I've seen too many people accuse the other of that, and it's not necessarily the case. And sometimes the person accusing them, they themselves have something. But I'm not looking here to diagnose people with certain names or labels. It's just the facts you want to know. If someone has diabetes, you want to know that they have diabetes. If they have something else, you want to know how it's affecting them. And this is true in all circumstances, because at least you want to eliminate that. Once you eliminate it, you say, okay, that's clean record on that area. Let's look at other issues. Sometimes it's actually an advantage to find out there is a real thing that can be treated, because then at least you have clarity. Much better than an ambiguity and a complete confusion around this subject. So that's how I would approach that. In relation to your questions from listeners about spouses on different religious, spiritual levels, what would be the approach for when there is a divergence from different religious paths, such as one spouse is a committed Lubavitcher and the other more in the Litvish or Daati Leumi persuasion? So in a way, I addressed it before regarding the child that wants to marry someone more modern, but let me address it in that context. Sholom Bayis is the biggest mitzvah of all. The Rambam says, the end of Hilchas Chanukah, Kol HaTorah le'nitna l'la'aseh shalom ba'olam. And to the extent that the Hebrew says, erase my name in the mitzvahs in the laws of Seita, in order to preserve Sholom bein ish ve'ishtei, peace between husband and wife. So generally, I would say this statement. It's a general statement, and every general statement has its exceptions, but generally I would say, if religion is the only thing that's getting between a husband and wife, there's a problem. Everything else is working except religion, there's something going on here. So the first thing you want to really deal with is what do you have in common? How's this working? The fact that someone came from a more committed Lubavitcher home, someone came from a more Litvish home, as long as they have certain things, where should be the machlekes here? Halachas are the same. Customs. So fine. So that when people love each other, they figure out how to work with each other and make themselves each comfortable. Just like people may have different tastes in food, but it's the same idea, or different places they like to travel to, or different colors that they like to get dressed in. So what you do is when people care about each other, even though we have differences, we work it out. So I have to understand where would there be the room for a disagreement. If it's egos and just control, then you're dealing with something of control. That's just dressing itself up in religious terms. So you have to really get down to the bottom of it. I find that when there is a disagreement that causes real Sholom Bayis issues religiously, there's something else going on. Because if they really believed and loved each other and cared for each other, you could work out most issues. And if there is an issue they can't work out, so you go to a third party. That's what Torah people do. The key is bittul. If you have bittul, you go to a Torah person and you ask, what would you do in this circumstance? That's my general response to that. Okay. There are more questions regarding this, but I'm going to do some feedback, and I think we'll conclude with a little feedback here. Let me do some feedback here. Just checking off what we've done here. Okay. So let me read a little feedback that we've received, which is always nice to read and hear. Okay. Not a question, but a thank you, a comment. Your Kabbalah of meditation went straight to the soul of, I think, anyone who heard it, and Imrit Hashem will hear it. He's referring to Kabbalah meditation was a program I did. Wednesday night, I have a class. Besides the Sunday night program, I have a class on Wednesday nights. So a few weeks ago, I did Kabbalah of meditation. So thank you for that. From words to niggin, you applied Chassidus to my life, and I'm grateful. More, please. This format, which seems like a one-to-one conversation, has the quality and power of a yechidus. Yeshur koyach, kol hakavod, and hatzlacha. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Dear Rabbi Simon Jacobson, I really hope that this email gets to you, knowing how awfully busy you are and how many emails you must get a day. I decided to take the chance just to express my extreme gratitude to you for saving me and changing my mindset. I'm 15 years old, a Chabad girl living in Israel. I've always appreciated my upbringing and valued the way we serve Hashem. Yet when I became a teenager, I was somewhat confused as I began exploring other frum groups in Israel. I became interested in the Daati world and its costumes. A girl there told me that they have a perfect balance. I learned a lot from them, but I feel this isn't my derech, my path for serving God. The girl there explained that they have a Shabbos shir that is co-ed, just teenagers, and I was rather baffled. For a Chabad, you never hear of such a thing. Boys stay in yeshiva, girls in school and at home. And only until Shidduchim do they actually begin conversing with boys, for the sole purpose of marriage. I explained to the girl my confusion, and she told me again that they have the perfect balance. Charade, she told me, is the extreme of not talking to the other. Charade? Not sure. Charade, she told me, is the extreme of not talking to the other gender. Non-religious is the extreme of being too close with them. And Daati Leumi is the balance of conversing to boys, but not too often, but a decent amount. I found myself agreeing to this, yet somehow I only felt more confused. Then a huge hashgacha pratis accrued. I found your book in our library and began reading it. Baruch Hashem, I have never enjoyed learning so much till I picked up your book. You captivated me that I found it hard to put it down. I even began carrying this book everywhere and taking notes down while I was on the bus and etc. I was very excited by the way you teach and started listening to you on YouTube. I felt you were talking straight to me. Your words entered my heart and suddenly showed me the difference between right and wrong. You taught me that there is a time and place for everything, and taught me that a person cannot get married if they are lacking, they cannot get married if they are lacking inner peace. Therefore, I understand that I am still young. Now is not the age for me to get distracted by boys. Now is the age for me to grow spiritually and learn how to harmonize both body and soul for serving Hashem. Now is the biggest chance I have, like you said. Youth has the fieriest energy, which you taught me to apply for passionate love to Hashem and His Torah. You taught me to focus on what's most important right now in my life, self-growth and avodas Hashem. This Shabbos shiurim will only get me more mixed up. These Shabbos shiurim will only get me more mixed up and distracted from my actual purpose. You have seriously transformed my summer. I thank Hashem for bringing you and your teachings into my life.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.
For me at the moment, you truly inspired me, and if I bring with my friends and I excitedly told them your teachings, their favorite was the spiritual spa that we should all look down, we should all take down. And that we all took down as a achlata to apply that into our vacation and our everyday lives. So in short, I began my journey for a more productive and meaningful summer inspired by your teachings. I will, be'ezus Hashem, continue focusing on self-growth and avodas Hashem. And yes, when the time comes, I will meet a boy with a clear understanding of what true love and true trust are. My heart exploded from this hashgacha pratis, and I knew I had to thank you, Hashem's messengers, for inspiring me to become a better person. I'm bursting with gratitude, and I hope you have this chus to continue inspiring many people like you have done for me. I will try to channel the fiery youth energy into good things. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for bringing me these eye-opening teachings and opening me up to understand what was right for me at the moment. I don't know how to express my extreme gratitude. I really hope that this email gets to you. From Crown Heights, Rabbi, you inspired a teenage girl in Beersheba to become a better person. You taught me that a person has the ability to change the world, and I cannot think of a better example than this. I'm somewhat reluctant to admit that my eyes did water up while sharing my experience with you. So with gratitude and embeddedness, I'll finish here. Sincerely, your favorite fan in Israel. Much hatzlacha Rabba. Okay, and one final feedback. Thank you again. I don't have words to express. Touching, humbling, but I felt I should read it because it was really touched me deeply. And finally, dear Rabbi Jacobson, I recently started watching your daily I Am Base class. I want to send a quick note to say thank you for doing it. You have an amazing way to take complicated concepts in Chassidus and explain them in easy terms that are very understandable. Every few days when something clicks, I have an aha moment and I have a new understanding of a concept I didn't know before. I feel so joyous it's hard to stay in my seat. I have the urge to get up and dance. As the Rebbe Rashab explains, there are 10 places where the Torah uses the pronoun hu, such as hu Avram, hu Achashverosh, to allude that their personalities are consistent throughout their lives because they draw their energy from such a high level of atzmus that isn't affected by creation, so it can remain a consistent flow. That's something we've been learning in I Am Beis just recently, and you can look at chassidusapply.com for more details if you want to participate in this daily class. I'm just adding that. I want to add my own words. Your classes are so consistently good that they also deserve the pronoun of who. Thank you, and may Hashem bless you with material and spiritual wealth and continued success. Okay, you may wonder, is this all getting to my head? Let me put it this way. I appreciate it. I see it as a type of endorsement or condoning what we're doing here with My Life Chassidus Applied. My main message, I would say to you, to those that are writing, and to everyone, the key is to pass it on. Share these teachings of Chassidus. They're not my teachings. They're Rabbeim's teachings with everyone you meet. It has the power to transform lives. And with that, we'll conclude My Life Chassidus Applied. This episode 443. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. And we'll be here next week with a special Yud Aleph Nissan and Pesach program. Everyone have a very lichtike, freiliche, and geuladike Kaddish Nissan, and a geuladike marching into Pesach, kosher and freilich and Pesach. But we'll still see each other before Pesach. Be well and kol tuv.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.